I lived in an apartment complex built in the late 70s or early 80s. It was once a premier property, but over the years its best days had faded. The complex had a diverse population and was built on uneven ground, historically sitting on Native American land, an area known for skirmishes and deaths. I lived in 2 different units within the complex. Initially, I was in a midsection apartment on the 2nd floor near the management office. I never had any major issues there, except for the mice, but the final straw came when I saw a roach. That was enough for me to decide to move. The office staff offered me a corner unit on the 3rd floor at the opposite end of the building. It had some updated furnishings, and, most importantly, no roaches. I was thrilled because I had always wanted a top-floor, corner unit. Fewer neighbors and no footsteps overhead. Or so I thought. Once I settled in, I was satisfied. The new unit was quiet. The roach problem was gone, and the mice were fewer, though I eventually broke my lease because of them. But I digress. Then, my partner, now my wife, and I started experiencing something strange. Every day, we would hear footsteps above us, even though we were on the top floor. Stranger still, the footsteps seemed to follow us, moving from the bedroom to the living room. I began noticing a pattern. Each night, after we settled into bed, we'd hear footsteps enter the room, pace in a circle in the corner, and then stop. The same thing happened when we went into the living room. The footsteps would eventually follow, pace in a circle, and settle there. The complex had a slanted roof, so I considered the possibility that someone was in the attic. But why would they be above our apartment? And why would they follow us? If I were hiding in an attic, I'd be as quiet as possible, so that theory didn't hold up. I also ruled out downstairs neighbors. The sound was distinctly coming from above, and even more unsettling, it felt like it was inside our apartment. I came to the conclusion that we were dealing with a spirit. I mentioned it to my partner, but she preferred to ignore spirits because of her spiritual background. She believes in them, but doesn't engage unless she feels threatened. I, on the other hand, am open to the paranormal and have studied demonology. At one point, I even considered becoming a priest and pursuing exorcism, but I also wanted a family and respected the cloth. People have told me I have the gift of discernment. I see truths in people, glimpses of the past, and sometimes visions of the future. I've even had remote viewing experiences. As for the entity in the apartment, I could see him in my mind's eye. A white man in his mid to late 20s, bearded and somewhat disheveled. He wore a flannel shirt and blue jeans. He would follow us from room to room, walking upside down on the ceiling, pacing in a circle, then settling. He would sit cross-legged, silently watching us go about our daily routines. One of the most intense experiences happened one night when my partner wasn't home. She lived close by. So close I could see her place from my window. That night, after she left, I went to bed. As I was drifting off to sleep, I felt my bed start to shake. I calmly assessed my surroundings. Sometimes, if a heavy train passed several miles away, we could faintly feel the vibrations, but there was no train. I considered a pinched nerve, so I shifted positions. Lying on my back now, the shaking continued, only harder. That's when I started to worry. I had never experienced anything like this before. Realizing it might be spiritual in nature, I said the Our Father prayer. The bed continued shaking for about 30 more seconds before finally stopping. I called my partner and asked if she wanted to come back and stay the night. She agreed, but then told me about her strange experience at home. She lived with her grandmother, and when she got home that night, she tried to open her locked bedroom door, but no matter how hard she pushed or twisted the handle, it would not budge. Frustrated, she called for her grandmother, a wise and spiritually powerful woman. Her grandmother yanked the handle with all her strength, and after several tries, the door finally gave way. This happened at the same time my bed was shaking. A strange coincidence. My partner eventually came over, and I felt much better with her there that night. Thanks for reading. We've had so many strange and astonishing experiences over the years. The best part? We've been each other's witnesses, and we've had others bear witness too. In 2012, I lived in Sonoma County with my boyfriend at the time and our newborn daughter. Our relationship was terrible. He was physically, verbally, and mentally abusive. The energy in that home was overwhelmingly negative, and looking back, it makes sense that something else might have been feeding on it. I don't remember the exact order of events, but I'll do my best to recount them. On 4 different occasions, I experienced sleep paralysis. It was absolutely terrifying. I had never experienced it before, and I haven't since. Each time I was sleeping on my back, I would wake up only able to move my eyes. I remember desperately trying to move my body to wake my boyfriend, but I couldn't make a sound, not even a grunt. I felt an enormous weight on my chest, as if someone was pressing down on me. There was a presence in the room, something completely different from my boyfriend. On a couple of occasions, I thought I saw a tall figure standing over me, almost on my chest. It felt like I was being crushed, struggling to breathe, like I was about to suffocate. I didn't always see the figure, but I always felt it. And I always sensed something standing at the opposite end of my bed. You know that feeling when you just know someone is there, even if you can't see them? That's what it felt like. I know this wasn't just anxiety or a panic attack. I've had plenty of those in my life. This was something else. One evening, I heard a loud noise coming from my infant daughter's room. When I went in, I saw that her lamp had fallen over. I thought it was strange, but I brushed it off and set it back up. About 15 minutes later, it happened again. Now I was freaked out, but I still tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was just off balance? I had checked the first time, but still, I adjusted it again. This time, I unplugged the lamp and placed it far away from anything that could possibly tip it over. It was one of those cheap, tall floor lamps, and I felt confident that there was no way it could fall on its own. 5 minutes later, it happened again. But this time, the lamp had fallen across my baby's crib. That was it. I picked up my daughter and held her tight for the rest of the night. I was terrified. I finally spoke out, firmly saying that I recognized the presence and that it was never to bother me again. After that night, I didn't experience anything else. I left my boyfriend, and that apartment soon after. Sometime later, I was looking through his Facebook photos. I zoomed in on one picture to see details, and that's when I saw them. 3 faces. They were blended into the background, somewhat translucent, like when you lower the opacity on an image in Photoshop or Procreate. But they were unmistakable. 3 men. Dark hair, dark eyes. Their faces were so menacing that even now, I can't bring myself to look at that picture again. Just writing this gives me chills. The first man had a blank expression. He was the hardest to make out, and I don't remember much about him. The second man. I could see the whites of his eyes. They were dark and heavy, filled with sadness. His expression looked lost. The third man was the most terrifying. His eyes were completely blacked out. I couldn't tell if he was wearing sunglasses or if his eyes were just like that. It looked like he had on stunner shades. He was grinning, clenching his teeth together in a way that reminded me of someone showing off a grill. I saved the photo on my old computer. I still have access to it, but I'd need to buy an old charger to power it up again. That apartment always felt off. I was constantly on edge, always sensing something lurking in the shadows. I have no doubt that something was in that space. I just don't know what. This is the first time I've ever shared this story. Until now, I've only told my husband. What do you think? Has anyone else experienced anything like this? Edit. My ex once told me that when he was an infant, his father sold his soul to Satan. I have no idea if that was true or if he was just saying something to mess with me. His father was severely mentally ill, especially when he was using drugs. But one thing I do know, darkness followed my ex everywhere he went. A disproportionate amount of evil and bad luck surrounded him. It was beyond coincidence. This is my post, but it's being shared in multiple paranormal groups to gather as much input as possible. My friend has an almost 3-year-old son, Blake, name changed for privacy, who is the sweetest little boy. However, over the past year or so, he has said some strange things. Things that were previously easy to dismiss, but have become harder to ignore due to recent occurrences. About 1.5 years ago, my friend and her family moved into a new house. Before that, they stayed at her mother's house for a while, living in the guest house. She and her sister are very close and co-parent each other's kids when they're together, which is several times a week. Over the past year, Blake has occasionally asked for his other mommy. At first, my friend assumed he was referring to her sister because of their close bond. He has also repeatedly said that he wants to go back home, even when they are at their own house. Initially, they thought he meant his grandmother's house, but when she reassured him that they were home, he would simply repeat it again. While they were staying at her mother's house, Blake's older brother, who was around 3 at the time, Blake was about 1.5, claimed he was seeing ghosts. They attributed this to a children's cartoon that featured a ghost dog, and after they saged the house, he stopped mentioning it. One particular night during that period, Blake was crying non-stop. When my friend picked him up, she was suddenly overwhelmed with an intense, dreadful feeling, almost as if something was telling her to put him down and run. Terrified, she grabbed him and ran out of the room, spending the rest of the night sleeping on the couch with him. She also recalls frequently feeling watched while living there, which unsettled her deeply. About 1 year ago, her husband woke up to see an older woman standing over him. Believing it to be sleep paralysis, he tried to remain calm, until she suddenly screamed, "I can't do this every night." He had never been so terrified in his life. Today, while playing outside, Blake once again asked for his other mommy, adding that she was a bat. This could have been influenced by an earlier TV episode, so they brushed it off. However, later in the evening, his dad walked into his room and overheard him whispering. When he asked who he was talking to, Blake simply replied, "My other mommy." Their children's media intake is carefully monitored, and they have never been exposed to anything inappropriate. This happened about 5 or 6 years ago during the summer. My partner, our friend, and I were out enjoying the warm weather, just hanging out and soaking up the day. We were walking along a footpath near our apartment. To our right was a wide-open dog park, and to our left, a small patch of trees. It was broad daylight, the mood was lighthearted, and we were all just enjoying ourselves. As we walked, I glanced up ahead and noticed something strange. With a chuckle in my voice, I casually asked, "Hey, Do you guys see that?" We all looked, and then stopped in our tracks. About 100 feet ahead, we saw a large figure. It was human-sized, but the clothing made it appear much wider than a normal person. At the time, we didn't describe it out loud, but we later confirmed that we had all seen the exact same thing. It was covered in bulky dark brown robes or layers of clothing that obscured any identifiable features. No visible arms, legs, or even a clear body shape. But the freakiest part? The mask. It looked like an oversized Zulu-style mask. The top of the mask extended about 1 or 2 feet higher than where the head should have been. It was 3 to 4 feet wide, and the bottom of it reached down to what would have been a human's mid-thigh or knees. We just stood there, staring, trying to comprehend what we were looking at. And then it got even weirder. It wasn't standing still. It was moving, almost dancing. It swayed side to side, shifting its weight as if stepping from one foot to the other, all while facing us. The movement was eerie, unnatural. At first we weren't scared, just confused. But then it started moving toward us. It kept up the same swaying, dancing motion, but now it was coming in our direction. And the part that truly made us panic? The speed. Its movements made it seem like it was stepping forward slowly, 1 step every 2 seconds. But somehow, despite that slow, deliberate motion, it was covering ground way too fast. It was approaching us at the speed of a full sprint, even though it looked like it was barely moving. That's when we ran. Without a word, all 3 of us turned and bolted as fast as our legs could carry us. We didn't stop, didn't look back, didn't speak. We just ran full tilt all the way home. Once we finally caught our breath, we tried to process what had just happened. It was, without a doubt, the most terrifying experience of our lives. And the strangest part? It was broad daylight. We all saw the exact same thing. Has anyone else ever experienced something like this? What do you think we saw? I'd question my own sanity, but we all saw it. What the hell was that?